Hello there and welcome to Blues Truths. Get it? It's a play on Blues Clues. This has already gone off to a fairly bad start. In terms of what you can expect to find on this channel, this is a channel that's mainly being created to house this sort of impromptu podcast I've decided to create. Mainly because I've always been obsessed with this sort of laid-back podcast type content. In terms of what sort of stuff you can expect to find on here, it will mainly be me rambling on about my favourite types of media, such as movies, TV shows, music, as well as various anecdotes about my day-to-day life. In terms of this first episode, I'll be talking about what I still to this day consider to be my favourite movie of all time, Spirited Away. Enjoy. I used to record so much stuff under many different guises and different YouTube channels, one of which was called FF6257, which is just not a catchy name. I don't know why I thought that would catch on. I would begin videos by literally saying, "Hello, FF6257 here." Like, I thought that was going to catch on. And I always found it easier when I was younger doing these videos, or like, you know, these audio type things, but now I find it kind of hard, and I think I'm a bit nervous. Which is odd, but I don't know, I guess I'll just keep on going and hopefully get back into the groove of it. Anyway, to give some context here, just recently I was talking to my friend, should I give real names here? Maybe not. Let's call him Jeff and see if I remember that. Oh, that's such a shit name, Jeff. Christ, oh well, let's call him that for now. And anyway, so I was talking to this friend Jeff about the idea of 10 out of 10 movies, because just recently he had started an IMDb page, simply so he can rank and, you know, catalogue different movies that he's seen. And he told me that there can never be such thing as a 10 out of 10 movie, because there's no such thing as a perfect film. So the highest rating he would give a film is 9 out of 10. And this to me came across as rather odd, because although there's no such thing as a perfect film per se, or technically I guess, I think that there can be a perfect film personally, in the sense that to you, this film ticks all the personal boxes of what you'd like to see in media, and just means a hell of a lot to you on a very personal basis, if that makes any sense. So after, you know, discussing this with Jeff, oh God forbid that name, for a little bit longer, he asked me, well, what's your perfect movie? And it came to mind instantly that it's Spirited Away, which has been a movie that I've constantly said is my favourite for years, since I was about 6 years old, in fact. So that's how far this context goes here, really. It's one of my earliest film watching experiences that I can remember, which is funny because at first I wasn't necessarily a big fan of this movie, because, you see, to give a bit more context here, I had an older sister, about 3 or 4 years older to be exact. I can't believe I don't remember the exact, year gap. That's kind of embarrassing since she's family, but whatever. Screw it, we'll just continue anyway. But yeah, so this older sister was kind of obsessed with anime, which I wasn't too big in on at the time, but that meant that, you know, any sort of anime property that would come out she'd basically watch and devour. And Spirited Away was one of these. And I remember her watching it, or at least I think I remember. It might be one of those things where you're not sure if it's actually a real memory or just one that you made up later on. But I think I remember the first time I watched it. And it was just one of those situations where you kind of walk past the TV and there's a movie playing, and you just get completely sucked into it, and slowly but surely you find yourself sitting on that couch and just getting wrapped up in this narrative. I've had this happen to me on numerous occasions, especially with these two movies, Rear Window and Escape from Alcatraz, which I might talk about at some stage here as well, because they're two movies that mean a lot to me too. But with Spirited Away, there was something about it that kind of instantly sucked me in. I don't know if it's that beautiful soundtrack or that animation that has an incredible amount of attention to detail, but there's something about that story that kept me invested. But then something happened here. This movie introduces the character No Face, and oh my god, this character scared the shit out of me. I mean, the image of this character, this sort of black-clad figure with this really creepy mask, stuck with me for years as a kid. Like, I used to have to sleep on one side of the bed because I legitimately had this thought that he'd be behind me. And my parents had this sort of white mask that reminded me of him. That just, every time I saw it, I'd completely shit myself. So in terms of my first relationship with this movie, I kind of just viewed it as that movie that was really scary. but for some reason incredibly alluring. Like, if I was feeling brave enough, my family would get it out from our local rental place, and we would watch it every single time. I'd be completely blown away. And I think a key reason to that is let's coin a term here. No, let's not do that. But it's that sort of Alice in Wonderland idea. The idea of getting a very human character and making them tumble into this strange, bizarre world and just kind of seeing what happens. Because this movie has this wonderful sort of... what's the right word that I'm looking for here? It just has this really wonderful beginning where it's so... Sorry, I'm going to scratch my nose here, so the speaker might go a bit... or microphone might go a bit weird for a second there. Anyway, it establishes this very real character instantly. Like, the first shot is this little girl in a car holding a bouquet of flowers, and just everything from the positioning and the way it's drawn feels so real, and they instantly open up with some very sort of relatable issues, like she's moving school for the first time, which is something that we can all relate to on one level or another, you know? It's something very human, and the movie goes to a great deal of, in these first few minutes, establishing this main character as someone that's very real, which makes it really easy to kind of follow her into this bizarre, surreal world that gets introduced later on. And, oh my god, just the framing device for this movie is so wonderful and so very Miyazaki in a way, in the sense that the parents appear at this abandoned theme park, which is, I believe, what they call it in the movie. And they sort of enter this, you know, this hole, this dark hole. And I remember specifically as a kid, there was this, there's this whaling museum near where, the place I grew up, which is still where I live today. There's this whaling museum, which is this really dark tunnel. And every time I would walk in there, and I'd cling to my mum, and we would quote that scene from Spirited Away. You know, a lot of my childhood and later years has been quoting Spirited Away, because this movie's just so, it's just stuck with me for so long. As well as just almost every single scene. But in terms of this particular moment, it's also great because the main character here, Chihiro, is so obviously aware that something bad is happening here. And you find it easy to sympathise with her because you know that something isn't quite right here, but her parents are so freaking oblivious to it. They're kind of just like, no, come along, while she's like, nah, there's something odd going on here. And just the way this movie slowly builds tension in these opening moments is why it's so captivating. It's very subtle. It's very much in the composition of the shots. And I remember there's this one video I watched, which is one of the better videos on Ghibli, because it's Ghibli being the name of the studio that made this movie, obviously. Because this video was from the context of someone who's just a complete, like, not normally a fan of anime, and kind of talks about this in terms of someone who's not normally a fan of this content, but has managed to fall in love with this movie in particular. And he has a lot of humour in it, but he goes into quite a lot of detail about these opening shots, and how they obscure the parents' faces, and like these shots go to a great deal of length to make you feel uncomfortable in very subtle cinematic ways, and it's just so clever. And the music, I still find it quite haunting to this day whenever I listen to that soundtrack, which is coincidentally the first album I ever bought with my own money, which is, I don't know whether to be judged on that or not. For a very long while I was known as this guy who only listened to anime soundtracks as a kid. That is very much not the case today. I like all kinds of music, but that's a stigma that still sticks with me to this day, with certain friends who've known me for a long time. Is that a negative thing? Who the hell knows? But in particular, this soundtrack, it adds so much to this fucking movie. Like, just that beginning song, One Summer's Day, I hold a lot of nostalgia for that, but I think it's one of those songs that you can listen to without any sort of emotional attachment to this movie and still feel a sense of nostalgia. This is very much the case of all of am I going to mess up his last name because it's Japanese? Joe Hisaishi. Well, I hope that's right. Hisaishi? Screw it, whatever. You know, with all of his compositions, they all have this sort of dreamy, nostalgic feel, and it's quite wonderful, and it suits this movie perfectly. It's soft when it needs to be, beautiful when it needs to be, and it's also quite loud and abrasive. I've had people complain that the movie's just really fucking loud, and I don't know, I've never viewed that as a problem personally, but I guess it shows that sort of, you know, contradiction in the sound. It can go from very beautiful to very loud, and it carries its way through the movie perfectly. It it wouldn't be half as captivating without that, I feel. Anyway, to go back to this opening scene, this still very much goes to show, well, still very much has this realistic characterization of the main character, Chihiro, in the sense that she is the audience surrogate. She's the one that you're attached to. Things are slowly but surely, they're going weird. There's tension building here. It's getting darker, and the whole way through, you're just behind her. And then it happens. Everything goes to shit. The parents turn into pigs. These weird, black, formless spirits start appearing, and bam, you're thrown into this, introduced to Haku, and it's such a brilliant first act, and it's hard as a kid, and even as an adult, to not get sucked into this, and it's probably the key as to why it's so successful, well, one of the many keys, in my opinion, and it's also, I think, the key as to why I can never stop watching it. Like, I keep them, every time I turn it on, I get sucked into it and I have to, watch the whole thing. Also, I think I've been covering my mouth certain stages, so every now and then you might hear me just mumbling, because I am not a professional, to say the least. But yeah, so, as a kid, I just got so incredibly into this film, and I have very distinct memories of being in pre-primary, which is one of the, very early grades in a Australian preschool, right? And just walking around to each individual person in my class, because, I was a social expert here, walking around to each individual person and asking them, have you seen Spirited Away? And hoping that one of them would say yes, so then we could become friends, and I could talk about just how great this movie is. And I remember one person in particular, let's call her Jeff too, because that's the name that I'm going to peg everyone with here. Anyways, I was talking to this particular girl, and I said, have you seen Spirited Away? And her response was, and I still remember this for some reason, she was saying that she desperately wanted to watch this movie, like, at the cinemas on this day, about a unicorn, but instead, her brother insisted they watch Spirited Away. And then after this, she responded with, it was really weird, and I hated it. I remember feeling so much venom in that moment, because this is the first time I'd kind of experienced somewhat of a conflicting opinion with me in terms of media, and dear God, I didn't really handle other people's opinions in a very good way when I was younger. I was kind of very elitist, a bit of an arsehole about it. Like, I've always been very heavily in love with Doctor Who, for example, and whenever I met someone who didn't like it, my first impression would be, it's just because they have bad taste. Nowadays, I'm very, I'm very different to that. People are allowed different opinions, that's fine. In fact, it makes for great conversation. I kind of adore it now, but back then, this girl, she was dead to me. She meant nothing, because she wasn't a fan of this movie that just meant so damn much to me. And it's funny, because I had quite a large gap where I just didn't watch this thing, because I'd kind of grown out of animation. I decided that was enough. I don't watch cartoons anymore. Or if I do watch cartoons, they're Family Guy, they're American Dad, they're these older cartoons meant for older people, because, I'm 12 years old now. It's time to grow out of this shit. So, there was about a 3-year period where I didn't watch this movie, and I decided that I'd grown out of it. It was childish. It means nothing to me. And then I distinctly, also, before this, when I was 6 years old, when I was walking around and, trying to find people into this movie, I didn't necessarily call it my favourite. I think my favourite was probably like the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man or something. When I called it my favourite was during this moment where I was 14 years old. I think I covered my mouth again. I was 14 years old, and I decided that it was time to get back into anime, because my sister, yet again, in a way, she sort of forced me into it. She was like, there's this show called Angel Beats, like, I think you'll like it. And I begrudgingly, because I thought anime was lame, I was like, okay, I guess I'll give it a shot. Then, one thing leads to another. I am head over heels for this show, and I decide, you know what, anime is my thing, I love it, this fits what I enjoy in media perfectly, because I've always had a love for animation. It's something I've never grown out of. It's always been something I've been very passionate about. Unfortunately, very early on I learned that I'm not good at it, because I'm not good at drawing, and I'm not one of those people who, didn't try to draw. You know, people always say like, oh, it's something you learn over time. No, I tried for fucking years. It's not something I'm good at. And yeah, animation, especially animation, I'm passionate about. 2D, hand-drawn, not something I'm very good at. Anyway, and anime fit this passion of mine. 2D animation, and it sort of worked for me because at this stage I was a teenager, you know, I was older, and anime very much caters towards teenagers. Not to say that old, adults can't enjoy it, because they most certainly can, but it caters to teenagers so well. Anyway, so I'd found this newfound passion. One day I decided, I'm gonna backtrack and watch that anime movie that shaped so much for me in these like early formative years, and just see what it's like. So I illegally downloaded it because that's what you do. I illegally downloaded it and I put it on my PSP, PlayStation Portable baby, and I press play, and then those first few notes of One Summer's Day start up, and my god, I am invested. I'm back into the movie instantly, and I remember finishing it, walking out into my kitchen and saying to my parents, this is my favourite movie of all time. Because this movie, and I could only work this out later on, it appeals to so much of what I love. I adore the fantasy genre, and this is one of the very best in there. And I enjoy those sort of Alice in Wonderland stories, as I discussed earlier, where a very normal human character gets dragged out into this strange, bizarre world. And this is a proven formula in anime in particular. In fact, there's a whole word for it called isekai, like a whole genre, where it's just based around, very down-to-earth, realistic characters getting thrown into these bizarre situations. And this is a genre that has become resented in terms of anime because it spawns shows like Sword Art Online. They don't necessarily have the best critical rep, which is fine, whatever. But this is most certainly an example of that. It's always been something that I've just absolutely loved. Just this sort of genre, this sort of idea. And I also, character is my favourite thing in all of media. I've always said that, you can get by in it, which is the bizarre and cool thing about characters, that you can get by in having a movie or TV show where not much happens as long as there's strong character. Sitcoms totally, they're a testament to this. Sitcoms don't necessarily have much of an overarching plot or much of an interesting plot. And a lot of it's just based around character banter, because when you have interesting characters and interesting dynamics, you can, it all speaks for itself. You can make very good media from that. And character has been something that from very, young age, I decided I was obsessed with and adored. And Spirited Away has just a brilliant character and it's got a diverse, cast of characters. It's got all these different kind of spirits. It's got this, the spider dude. Nice. That'd be a great knockoff Spider-Man. Spider dude. I want to see that one day. Anyway, this spider creature called Kamaji. It's also got Lin, who's a wonderful character. It's got Yubaba, this evil witch. And it's just, there's such a diverse cast of characters, which is just very rich for someone who's into this idea of characters. Drinking game, drink every time I say characters in this podcast. You will probably be completely knocked out by the end of it. But it also has this brilliant arc as well. This movie has this great arc. And in fact, a lot of the foundation of this movie was based on displaying this arc. Because if I remember correctly, and maybe don't quote me on this, because this isn't very well researched, but I think I know what I'm talking about. One of the main inspirations for Miyazaki in creating this movie was he had observed his friend's 12-year-old girl, and he had kind of gotten this idea that 12-year-olds in that generation weren't quite what he wanted them to be. They seemed rude and lazy, and he wanted to depict a movie that took a 12-year-old girl and made her 10 years old. I think it was actually, 10 years old. Sorry, I was talking about me being 12 before I got all muddled up. Anyway. So he decided to create this whole movie about this 10-year-old girl getting thrown into this scenario where she would have to, do things that generation he grew up in would have to do. She would have to struggle, work, do all these very adult things and see, how she grows. So this whole movie was based around the idea of a strong character arc, and it works incredibly well. It brings great clarity and focus to it. Another good, successful selling point here is one of the most well-known facts about Miyazaki ever is the fact that he doesn't write with a script. I remember seeing this video about Ghibli where this man stated that because, and I wish I could remember the exact title of this particular video, but the guy who's making this video said that because there's no script, every scene is important, and it's true. You get the sense that he's just making up these scenes as they go along, and each scene isn't adhering to a normal story structure, meaning that they're all unique and they're all very exciting, and you never know what's gonna, appear around that corner. And this has always been the case in Miyazaki movies, even the films of his that are based off books, such as Kiki's Delivery Service and Howl's Moving Castle. I have read the original source material for the microphone might go a bit weird here, hold on a sec, for Howl's Moving Castle. And my god, there are similarities to the movie, but you can tell that Miyazaki kind of just goes off in his own direction and still adheres to his sort of loose, no-script format regardless. And I think it's wonderful. Not something that I recommend for everyone. Story structures are there for a reason. Not everyone can pull this off, but he's got such an abundance of imagination. He pulls this off so well while still managing to have, a clear, concise story and, regular, reoccurring themes. And my god, this film is not only abundant on themes, but it also it takes a lot from Japanese mythology. A lot of these spirits are inspired by, real mythological Japanese spirits, and a lot of the architecture is based on actual Japanese architecture, and it creates this really unique world that is unlike anything that you see in Western depictions of fantasy settings. Deciding to be inspired by this very Japanese architecture gives it this Eastern bizarre feel that I think is, I burped a little bit there, professional, like I said, but it gives it this very Eastern feel that is incredibly captivating, and it's one of the main draws here. And it's, it's inspired by, like I said, a lot of this mythology, and it creates this very unique, different world here, and it's hard not to fall in love with this. And I guess if I was to suggest that this movie had a structure, even if it wasn't intentional, there is a bit of structure there, in the sense that first act, it's the introduction of the characters, the family in the car, like I said. But the second act is where this movie really shines for me. It's one of my all-time, favourite middle sections of a movie, which is a bizarre statement to make, I know. But trust me on this, there's this middle section where the movie kind of cycles through these different short stories. And this section is wonderful because Chihiro as a character really grows here, and it shows her interacting with different characters, and it brings out that personality. She starts working with Lin, and instantly you work out that Lin it's a sort of surrogate mother figure. She's instantly likable, and her interactions with Chihiro are just so wonderful. Like the scene where Chihiro is, clearly upset, she helps her out. The scene where she tries to, find the different shirts for her, and it's just, I don't know. Their interactions are so wonderful, and it doesn't take long for you to start to fall in love with these different spirits. As threatening as they look, Miyazaki makes them so likable, because very quickly a lot of them decide to help Chihiro out and be on her side, and it's hard not to, as a kid, despite these sort of scary exteriors, I began to become quite invested in these characters. And it's funny just how this middle section not only expands on that, but it brings in these different scenarios that, like I said before, act as these sort of mini short tales. Like, there's a scene where that mud monster, that mud creature comes wandering into the bathhouse, and everyone freaks out. It stinks. It creates this very hilarious scene. And then Chihiro has to help clean this thing. She pulls out that bicycle, which is also inspired heavily by real life occurrence. Miyazaki, this has been, heavily cited everywhere. Miyazaki always talks about it. Well, not necessarily always talks about it, that was a weird thing to say. But people who talk about Miyazaki and this movie always talk about it. There we go, that's what I meant to say. Odd thing to say, anyway. In the sense that he was helping clear out this river one day, because of course he was, this very dirty river. And, as part of this sort of cleaning program, they pulled out this bicycle. So it's very much inspired this event in the movie. And it's just, it's a wonderful sort of self-contained nugget. And it's so memorable, and it has very, very distinct moments. And I especially love when, the monster's all cleaned off and it goes flying out and you hear that laughter. Because it just, this whole little story alone perfectly encapsulates everything that captivated me about the movie when I was younger. It's funny, it's weird, and at the end it's quite creepy in its own way. Like, the design of that creature was quite creepy to me. And it's just this middle section in particular. It's just, it keeps itself fresh, it keeps itself exciting by going through all these different, story beats. And then this third act contains what is quite possibly my favourite scene in all of media, and it encapsulates another thing that's not only important about this movie, but it's important about most of Miyazaki's films in general, and yet again it is heavily quoted, heavily talked about, and it's these scenes called Ma. Now, I got that word from a Roger Ebert interview that he did of Miyazaki, where he talked about the quiet moments. That's what I'm discussing here. The quiet moments in Miyazaki movies, the fact that they can always find time to breathe. This is heavily prevalent in even his, debut film, Castle of Cagliostro. There's a scene where the two main characters, Lupin and, crap, I forgot the other guy's name, the one with the really, twisted beard. I usually know this. It's not going to come to me. Anyway, where they're just lying down in this car, and the scenery sort of speaks to itself, and this is something that's just so integral to these films. The sense that he does let his movies breathe a little bit, and he has these scenes of contemplation that help break up the action, and really, they add a lot. And the scene I'm talking about, obviously, is the train scene, in the back end of this film, because even as a kid watching this, as a 6-year-old who is, my attention span very short, which is, not just a judgment on myself here, this is the case of most kids. But there's something about this scene that keeps you invested, it keeps you watching the whole way through. And it's just, I adore it every single time. It's absolutely beautiful. The way that soundtrack plays out, the different scenery that goes past, which is quite mysterious. Even now, I'm conjuring up different images in my head, that little ghost girl who's going past. I remember reading a post that said they viewed that girl as this sort of, well, to give a bit of context, actually, this whole post was dedicated to that scene, and it was different writers' interpretations of this sequence, which is just goes to show how captivating it is, because everyone remembers this scene. Everyone who's watched this movie remembers this scene. I remember one writer saying they felt like that little girl was sort of a warning of what could have happened to Chihiro if she didn't win this journey, if she didn't make it out, safe and well. And it's funny because that's kind of how I viewed it as well. There was something so ominous and alluring about that one shot of that ghost girl going past. And this is one of the many segments that make the scene so alluring. Because, there's so many images that go by, not with much context, not with much, explanation. It's just silence, Chihiro looking out that train window, and it's so beautiful and so haunting and mesmerizing. It's hard to keep your eyes off it. And it's just stuck with me throughout all these years. I remember buying this Spirited Away art book at this convention that, happens every year near where I live. I still do it. I still go to it every year. It's called Supernova. It's it's sort of better Comic-Con for where I live, Perth, Australia. Is that a controversial statement? Possibly. But no one listening to this cares. Anyway. So yeah, I remember buying this art book about Spirited Away, and the first thing I do when I pick up this book, when I first started, I should buy this, because it's $40, okay, a bit expensive, anyway. So I'm flicking through it, I turn to this page, and it's just 2 pages dedicated to that train scene, and that's it. I'm sold. I want to read about that train scene. I want to forever be able to go to these images based on it. That's just how much I adore it. And I've been talking a lot about this movie in terms of narrative beats. Not very. Not in a very smart, analytical way. I've kind of just been rambling. There's not much focus here, which is fine. That's kind of what I want for this podcast. I want to feel very real. Like the characters. Hey! Anyway. But I haven't been going into too much detail, in particular, about the idea of romance in this movie. Because I remember, as a kid, I always pretended that I hated the romance genre. It was something I despised. It was lame. Only girls like it. Backwards and sexist, I know, but you're a kid, what can you do? And it's funny because eventually I let all that stigma go, and I started to get into romance movies, romance anime. I fell in love with movies like Moonrise Kingdom, which have this very romantic slant. I remember saying this to my mum one day when I was 14, 15, when I was first starting to not care so much about what other people think. Shedding those insecurities, getting into this genre. And I remember her saying, well, of course you love romance, because you're Miyazaki's #1 fan. And I thought this was kind of funny, because it's very true. His films are incredibly romantic, but they never were, in the sense, the conventional, romantic movie that I had come to know from American, and I guess Australian media. In the sense that, I don't know, these were never the focal point, and the romance always seemed to be in the background for me, but they very much mean a great deal to this movie. For example, the first time I finished watching the movie and I came out of that cinema. Actually, no, this wasn't the first time I watched it. I'm misremembering here. My parents later clarified. The first time they watched it and they walked out, their friend, they're talking about what they thought the meaning of this movie is. A lot of people have different meanings here. Miyazaki has clarified on this a bit, but, we won't go into that too much here. But anyway, that friend in particular said that the movie was about the power of love, which is, corny, mushy statement, but it just goes to show how much this does affect the movie here, because the relationship between Chihiro, how did I pronounce her name? Chihiro, and Hakuru's, it's very integral. He's this character that helps throughout the whole entire movie, the whole entire plot. At the end, one of the best scenes is, when they're holding hands and they're flying through the sky, and that soundtrack just soars, and it's absolutely beautiful, and they're crying. But it's funny, because this movie didn't have this big moment where they kissed or they had a fight in the middle section. It's sort of the romance movie tradition where, it begins up, their feelings for each other in the middle, they have this fight, and at the end they make up. This movie doesn't follow any of that. It just has this very pure, beautiful depiction of these two characters that are very much in love with each other. She states this at the end, And it's such a pure, wonderful thing that you don't see in movies too much, This very childlike, perfectionist view of love that it's nice having this break, and it doesn't feel unearned in these movies, because these movies still do show a few more dark aspects. You can forgive this detail, and it's such, oh my god, I laugh now when my mum says that, you're Miyazaki's biggest fan. Of course you would, be a fan of the romance genre, because other movies of his, such as one that he wrote, he wrote this movie, he didn't direct it, but this other film is Whisper of the Heart, and this is his very sort of idealized romance, and I absolutely love this movie growing up as well. I have sort of similar childhood memories linked to it, and it's just, Miyazaki writes it so well, and it feels quite unconventional, and just so him in how beautifully conveyed it is, and it's such an important aspect to the movie, and it goes to show how wide-ranging it is, You've got your fun, fast-paced, I guess you could say action. I like to think there's action here, like that scene where she's running down those steps and she crashes at the end, and the scene where Haku first grabs her and they go flying through, that bridge, after she finally lets go of her breath, all these really, you've got these great action set pieces. You've got great romance, which is something they can connect to as well. Brilliant world building. There's so much here. There's so much wide-ranging textured stuff. And it just shows how much of a mass appeal this movie ultimately has. Even though most people I've encountered have told me that it's weird, but it won the Academy Award, speaks for itself. But another thing that I do want to go into here is the animation, because it's so important, it's so beautiful. It's still, in my opinion, Miyazaki's best looking film, I remember reading in that aforementioned art book that with each of their films, they pick a primary colour, this sort of reoccurring colour that appears in, most of the frames of the animation. And for this movie, they said this was red, which makes sense, because you do feel a red tint into even the poster itself. I've got this postcard because I bought this Ghibli box set, because of course I did. What a waste of money. No one uses DVDs anymore, but I bought this, and it came with these lovely postcards, and even the Spirited Away one has quite a large emphasis on red. And it's just, there's something about that, something about having this consistent theme that adds a lot to this movie. And with the animation, though, it's not as consistent as I remembered, because I only noticed this later on, but the animation style changes, in subtle ways throughout. Like, for example, when Shiro first enters that boiler, it becomes a bit more exaggerated, a bit different. I remember watching this Digibro video that discussed this. I keep on quoting out of videos here. Hopefully that's not a point of contention for people later on. Hopefully no one takes the video seriously, because it is rambling. But anyway, Digibro video that stated that different primary animators were used, different styles. So this kind of blows this whole idea out of the water that Miyazaki is this dictator, who does most of the frames himself, because clearly there are other visions being implemented here, other styles of animation, and it's really wonderful, and it keeps things fresh. But one other thing you gotta discuss when mentioning any of these movies is the realism, how well it lets you acclimate to these characters. For example, there's that famous scene, she's walking away from the soot sprites, and she puts on her shoe, and she struggles a bit, it's not just as easy as like her foot goes into that shoe, that's simple. No, it's very human. She struggles, and she puts an effort to put on this shoe. Why is this tiny detail important? You see, with animation, you don't need to put in human flaws. You don't need to put in the fact that we don't just put on shoes perfectly. We struggle a bit. We have to get that heel in. You don't show that normally. But there's something very important about doing it, because having these very real, these very human little interactions, little actions, goes a great deal in humanizing characters. We, after seeing this, we then perceive this character as human in a way that's very subtle. She hits her head at the end of this scene, when you don't have to add that. That's extra work for the animators. But it's so recognizably human, and it helps you get attached to this character so well. And this is also the case with, the Spider Dude, which is what I'm just going to call him from now on. Spider Dude Kamaji. Even if he's got these wild, exaggerated movements with all his different arms, when he's eating that rice, with those chopsticks, it's so incredibly human, and it goes a great deal in making you connect, with said character, and it's so beautiful. They put so much emphasis, so much effort into these little details, to bring up Roger Ebert again, just one of my favourite reviewers of all time, one of my biggest inspirations in terms of writing. He didn't just write movie reviews, he wrote goddamn poetry, which is a corny statement, I know. But it's true, it has some really beautiful things there, and he said that Spirited Away is one of his favourite movies of all time. And he noted that the second time he watched this movie, he saw that, even in the windows, the distant windows, you see, moths buzzing around. There's just so much love and labour went into this, and it's an incredible sight to behold. This world feels so lived in, It's like, I miss family movies that are like this, where it's, like the 80s fantasy trend. I adore 80s fantasy movies, like Never-Ending Story, The Dark Crystal. Although these movies are flawed, there was a sense of excitement because these worlds felt so lived in, because they weren't perfect utopias. They were worlds where there was something legitimately scary, while there was also heart as well, Never-Ending Story, you have that wonderful, small family in that tree, as well as that terrifying wolf, and it's Spirited Away. Oh, Dark Crystal as well, you have the Skeksis, but great moments of beauty as well. And in this movie, that's very much the case. This world feels real and it feels lived in, because it's a good balance of the good and the bad. And it's something that helps with the world building a great deal, and you don't see it much. And that's something that I find highly disappointing. But anyway, I might close off this episode here, because I've been going on for a long time. If there's something that, if there's a final message to get out of this, it's that Spirited Away, it's an important movie to me, and it's by and large considered one of the greatest animated movies of all time. You know, almost everything about it is beautiful. It's not necessarily perfect, but I guarantee that if you watch it, you'll find something to get out of it. Like I said, it's quite wide-ranging. And before I finish this off, I want to talk about my experience of introducing it to other people, because I don't have many friends that are sort of open-minded in terms of what they want to watch. They're very sort of jaded, especially in terms of anime, because, you know, the internet doesn't give good rap, sometimes justifiably so. Things like lol, you need to fucking die. But in terms of this movie, whenever I introduce it to someone, by and large they've enjoyed it. They've always managed to find one thing about it they don't enjoy. And if I had to pick, I mean, because like my friend said, like what spawned this whole podcast, my friend said that no movie's perfect. You know, you gotta have 9 out of 10s. Even though it's 10 out of 10 for me, I've got to mention a flaw. I've got to balance out this video somehow. So let me think on this a moment. What would be my personal flaw with Spirited Away? I guess, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, here we go, the climax. The climax, it feels a bit shoehorned in. It's a bit easy. Yeah, she kind of just goes, my parents aren't the pigs at all. And it's so beautiful, because everyone gets so excited that the arms move up and around, and, you know, every character is feeling something in that scene. Look in the background, every character's got something that they're doing, which is this very Akira Kurosawa technique. You know, have you ever watched Every Frame of Painting? He does this video on Akira Kurosawa where he says that his movies had, one of the key components of his movies is that every character, like, if there's an action, you know, an important action, every character will do this action. You know, there are plenty of scenes where a whole entire crowd is moving. You know, all these different characters are doing the same movement, and it helps, like, bring into focus the urgency or, you know, the emotion of a scene. If any of that makes sense. Very pretentious way of wording it. I recommend watching that video. It's beautiful. And that's very much something Miyazaki employs in his movies as well. And it's in effect here. You know, there's not much to hate about this scene, but it does feel a bit forced. So yeah, that's my main flaw. It's definitely a shoehorned in ending, and that might be of consequence to the fact that Miyazaki doesn't have a script. Who knows? All of his endings are kind of a bit odd, to say the least. Some of them were really great, some of them, not so much, like this one. Other than that, it's still a great movie. And one interesting thing, if you watch this dub, not only do you get the voice of the little girl from Lilo and Stitch, which is pretty cool, just a great vocal performance in my opinion, but you also get this line of dialogue that's tacked in on the end, where the parents are driving away on the car, and then the parents say something along the lines, I'm not going to be able to quote it directly here, not that good. The parents say something like, are you still scared about the school? And she says, I think I can handle it. Like, it's interesting, because even when I was younger, you can kind of tell it's tacked on. It doesn't feel natural. But a lot of people complain about it. A lot of people say this is a major flaw they have, but it doesn't bother me. It reaffirms the character arc. It does feel a bit forced down the throat, but in terms of, you know, it's still a pretty stellar dub regardless, and it's a minor consequence. So yeah, those are my rambling, insane opinions about Spirited Away. Hopefully you got something out of this. You know, this podcast is mainly just meant to be a sort of relaxed format. You can listen to this while sleeping or leave it on in the background. You're not meant to take this thing too seriously, but like I said, this is a wonderful movie. I hope that you've at least seen it before listening to this, because, you know, I don't give too much context with the scenes. I kind of just go straight into it and start going, this and this. So hopefully you've seen it beforehand, or somehow I've inspired you to watch it if you got this far, because it's a complete cinematic gem, and we haven't had something quite like it before or since. Go check it out, and hopefully enjoy the first episode of Blues Truths. To give more context on that name, I didn't really want to use my real name on YouTube anymore, so I was like, let's just call myself Blue, because I was going to have a podcast years ago where like there'll be this fame of me and my friends are named after colours. Like I was going to be blue and my friend was going to be red. It stems from that weird, innocuous backstory. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy it. And yeah, I'll do one of these again, hopefully. Enjoy. Enjoy. What the fuck does that mean? Why did I end it with that? Enjoy. Screw it. Let's do that every time now. Enjoy.